How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Cryptic Commander YouTube channel. I'm your host, Slothy, and as you guys might know, I joined on as a Commander player, but I'm still very into Modern, but don't know a lot about it. So I've got a very special guest to help us out with that today. Why don't you introduce yourself there?
Hey everyone, this is Nikachu, Merfolk Master, but also Modern Analyst. I started off with Modern Merfolk, but as I delved deep and mastered the deck and won many tournaments and events, I really learned the Modern format, because if you want to win in Modern with an underpowered deck, you better know everything about your competition. So I've become a Modern authority.
Absolutely. So thanks for coming on, by the way. It's
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, of course. So let me just get right into the meat of it. What is Modern as a format?
What is Modern? Like some people like bring up, why isn't this card legal in Modern? Why is Brainstorm banned in Modern? But here's the deal. Brainstorm's not banned in Modern. It just was never legal. So Modern is a 60 card format with sets that were standard legal starting at Mirrodin and going up. Same thing with 8th edition going up, and includes some made for Modern sets, Modern Horizons 1 and Modern Horizons 2. Were they a blessing or a curse? I mean, history is going to have to wait and shake that one out. But that overall, that's Modern. You make a 60 card deck out of those sets.
Awesome. So one question that I was actually asked earlier today, what does a game of Modern look like? Like, how does it usually play out? How fast is it in comparison to like standard or historic?
It's really powerful. If you do not interact with your opponent, or you have no intention of winning by turn 3, your opponent probably will win by turn 3, or will be effectively won by turn 3. There are decks that can have 7 mana in 3 turns. There's decks that can have like 10 mana basically by 3 turns. Like these Amulet Titan decks can create an enormous amount of mana. Some decks can get really lucky and win by turn 2. So what's really important is you either got to be putting on the pressure big time, or you got to be stopping the pressure big time, interacting with your opponent, because if you just completely ignore them, they'll crush you very quickly. So it's a very not necessarily fast, because so long as you are interacting, the games can go long, and Modern promotes that sort of interaction, but it's powerful. There are a lot of cards in this format. The card hits the battlefield, sometimes the game is over, like Blood Moon, an enchantment which turns all the non-basics into mountains. There's like Ensnaring Bridge, preventing creatures from attacking so long as the opponent has an empty hand. And so it's a very high power format.
Yeah, it's definitely, from the few games that I played, I've definitely seen if you're not with it, you're gonna be taken out like nothing.
That's why a lot of people, they look at a hand, well, I'm not doing anything on turn 1, I'm not doing anything on turn 2, but I got a good balance of lands and spells. That's not good enough in Modern. You have to be interacting with your opponent, or you better be doing something by turns 1 and 2. You can't take 2 turns off, that's for sure. Even taking 1 turn off can be a big deal.
Yeah, it's not like in like standard, for example. I find that the games are definitely a lot more forgiving if you take like 1 to 2 turns off, especially right at the start of the game. But Modern,
absolutely,
you just cannot do that.
Yeah, it would be too wishful of thinking that your opponent will do nothing for the first few turns. Sometimes that happens. There are some decks like this. There's like Control. Maybe Stoneblade isn't going to be all out killing you. Stoneforge Mystic turn 2. Batterskull's not coming out till turn 3. And Batterskull's not going to attack until turn 4. But you can't ignore the combo decks. You can't ignore like these Burn, these Mono Red Ragavan. Is it Murktide decks that are just going fast and furious, turns 1, turns 2, applying a lot of pressure, prowess decks with Sprite Dragon. You could be down to 7 life by turn 3, and if you're playing your first spell by turn 3, I mean, the game is basically over.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that brings us to the next question that I've got for you here. What decks would you recommend beginners to play? Like, just all out, what would be a good starting point to be able to play at that level?
Well, I don't want to get too deep into like how deep is your wallet, But
Mhm.
I mean, your wallet might dictate exactly where you're going to play because I mean, because the most because the deck because the format is full of so many powerful cards, there's usually a high price tag associated with those powerful cards. Also, the mana bases, which I think is ridiculous. Not that I think the price of fetch lands need to come down, but I don't like it when people think, well, I can't afford the fetch lands, so I can never play this deck, which is just complete nonsense. You can play
Yeah.
with a lot of substitutes. Don't play with Verdant Catacombs. Play with Blooming Marsh. It's like $10. And you know what? Even for some people, a budget mana base still might be too much.
Mhm.
But it will be playable. Like it's really going to be playable. You're not going to scrub out completely because you're playing with fast lands instead of all the fetch lands. Is your mana base better with the fetch land? Sure they are, but it's not so much better that you can't like go 4-0 at your FNM or even be competitive online.
Mhm.
So price range is going to determine a lot. So the first thing I would say is, what do you like to play? That would be my first question to you. If price is not an option, what do you like to play? Do you like to play a control deck? Do you like to play a combo deck? Do you like to play tribal? Do you like to play mid range? Do you like to play aggro? Because Modern has basically anything and everything. They've got like artifact prison decks. Uh, we've got like super fast aggro artifact decks. You got it all. You got it all.
Mhm.
So if price is not an option, I would say pick one of the better decks that are in your style.
Mhm.
I used to be in that range of like, I'll go play Burn, go play Bogles, but sometimes that can really backfire. Even if the deck is somewhat simple to play, it might not matter all that much. If you buy into that deck and you end up not enjoying it, then you're going to like waste money, like selling it back until you play what you really want to play. Because
Mhm.
no matter what, Modern's an experience-based format, and whatever you pick up, you're probably just going to get killed. And it's just simple as that. It's a lose and learn format. There's many
Yeah.
decks. It's not standard where there's like, how many decks are in standard usually? Would you say?
Ooh, I don't play a lot of standard, but I say five,
You want
5 to
five,
10.
sometimes three.
Yeah.
You labeled that correctly, but in modern it's like 40, 60. There are
Mhm.
so many decks now. I'll write a huge sideboard guide and people are still asking me, well, what about the storm matchup? What about the elves matchup? What about like all these fringe decks that people still play against because they still show up? So
Mhm.
there's a million decks. So I would say pick the deck that you really in the style of deck that you really enjoy, and hopefully it has a nice high meta percentage at the moment, and then
Mhm.
you just learn it from there. Now let's say you don't have a lot of money. Let's say you're strapped for cash. You need to save some dollars. Well, okay, there's a lot of options out there for you. I'll just promote myself. You can play Mono Blue Merfolk on a pretty good of a budget. Doesn't play any fetch lands. There's no flashy dual lands. It's just a bunch of islands. You don't need Ether I'll just play more lands. You don't have to play with the expensive cards. They got Force of Negation is like outrageously expensive right
Yeah.
now. Just play Counter Spell, play Spell Pierce. They still work. They still work all the same. Now, other
Yeah.
options, you could go the red route. You could go mono red burn. You could go mono, and if you go mono red burn, then you just have to play with the mountains, and you can upgrade that deck into a Boros burn deck if you wanted to. You could go mono
Absolutely.
red prowess. You play Monastery Swissbeer. You play Soul Scar Mage. You play, I think Bone Crusher Giant's really cheap right now. It's like $1 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's not going to be in standard, so it's going to be even cheaper. So you can play mono red prowess. You can play Bomat Courier, Kiln Fiend, and you just play a bunch of cheap burn spells, Lightning Bolt, Lava Dart, Firebolt, and just a bunch of mountains. And that can actually get you pretty far. I mean, we've got people like M. Hayashi playing this rogue mono red prowess deck for a very long time. He's upgraded with a lot more expensive cards,
Yeah.
but you can still get a really good playable deck if you just play it completely on a budget. So if you're really strapped for cash, still want to play the format, those are some decks that I could recommend.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the expensive lands. So what does the typical,
Mm.
like, say, non-budgeted, what's the typical mana base look like? Like number, type?
Well, that's the thing. You know what? It's all over
Or,
the place. I would not
mhm,
say any. I mean, there's the fetch land mana bases look very similar. They got some X number of fetch lands, they got
yeah.
some shock lands, and they have to have some basics, usually equal to the spells that they cast. So if you've got a double black spell in your deck, then you're going to
Mhm,
have two swamps
yeah.
because you need the insurance for Blood Moon. You have to play around Blood Moon in Modern. Blood Moon is like one of those key core staple cards that just completely ruin some decks. If it comes out on turn 2, turn 3, or whatever, it can completely lock people out from playing spells for the rest of the game because
Mhm,
it'll lock out the fetch lands and it'll lock out the shock lands. And if you can't use the red man, you're really doomed.
yeah.
So a lot of those decks can be similar. And that's actually some value to the fetch lands. That would be the only thing I really love about the fetch lands. You can fetch out your basics. So you
Yeah.
strategically get the basics out before the blood moon hits. And now you're safe. So those mana bases look very similar. Some X number of fetch lands, shock lands, maybe one triome, and then enough
Mhm,
basics to cast all your spells. But then like you get like humans, which is like 4 Cavernous Souls, 4 Unclaimed Territory, 4 Ancient Ziggurats,
mhm,
some Horizon Lands. That's a completely different mana base. You have something like Merfolk. It's a bunch of islands, some Cavernous Souls, 4 Mutavault, Oboro Menamo. It's got its own mana base. You look at Amulet Titan. So this is an archetype that uses the Karoo lands.
mhm,
Those are the bounce lands with like Simic Growth Chamber. It
yeah.
enters the battlefield tapped, and you have to return a land back to your hand. And that deck is just beyond nuts if you look at the mana base. It's full of those bounce lands and just all Colony Garden and the Teleria West. Oh,
Yeah.
it's completely own different breed.
Oh
And
yeah.
then but every single archetype is actually all over the place. You could say the fetch land, shock land mana base is very, very similar, but depending on the deck, I wouldn't say there is any pattern. There
Okay.
isn't a very strong pattern from one deck to another.
So it's all just kind of working around what it's got in the deck itself.
Yes, the
Okay.
mana base will strongly dictate almost by the also the synergy of the archetype itself. Like artifact decks will want to play with Darksteel Citadel, the indestructible artifact land,
Yeah.
or Ink Moth Nexus,
Mhm.
or what is it called? Glimmer. The land, if there's a like we'll just say Spire Bluff, not Spire of Industry, there you go, that's one.
Yeah.
There's another one I can't remember off the top of my head that the artifact decks play, but like so the lands will be heavily dictated by the archetype being played.
Yeah. Um, so I got more of a question that's just for you and less about modern as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
What actually got you into playing Merfolk? This is one that I've actually personally wondered for a long time.
Pretty simple solution. So I got into well, I should say I got back big time into Magic around the Return to Ravnica Theros standard. So I was playing a few months prior, but then this standard comes out and creates I'm a blue player. I love playing blue. I was sort of
Yeah.
frustrated with the prior standard because there was no blue deck that I really loved. And a tier 1 deck was born. It was called the Mono Blue Devotion. It played Master of Waves, it played Thassa, played Tidebinder Mage, played Cloudfin Raptor. It's just
Yeah.
mono blue creatures with huge devotion payoffs. And I love this deck. I played that entire standard, every standard event I could show up to. I showed up to them all. It was wonderful. Now
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what do I play for modern. I start off with Bogles.
Mhm.
I lost all my matches. I lost like I don't know. We lost 22 matches straight. Everyone brought in Spellskite against me, and I was just too inexperienced to know Spellskite. Everyone played Spellskite at the time for
Yeah.
Splinter Twin. It's this artifact, 0/4 artifact. You can pay Phyrexian Life to change the target of a target spell to Spellskite. So all my
Mhm.
auras from Bogles, by the way, is just a pure hexproof aura deck. You play one
Mhm.
hexproof creature, you cast aura spells on it, try to make a big creature and kill your opponent. But that Spellskite stole everything. So I lost all my games. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, we got to scrap this thing. We got to start. We're starting all over again. We're going back to
Mhm.
square one. What do I play? And then it turns out Merfolk in modern was like really similar
Mhm.
to Mono Blue Devotion in Standard. Add Master of Waves and Tie Bar Mage, and it was just an upgraded version, really. You upgraded the Standard cards with the great Merfolk creatures from Modern, and boom, you got a deck. And so, hey, I love that deck in Standard. I'm gonna play this deck in Modern. So that's how I started my Merfolk journey.
Excellent. And I guess that's really seemed to pay off for you so far. Well,
Yes, I mean it did. I mean, I don't know where my YouTube channel would be or my stream career without Merfolk.
yeah, absolutely. Let's see. So, what would you say, like, for a beginning player, about the pros or cons to Magic the Gathering online versus paper modern? Like, say this is pre-COVID times, you're able to do both.
Pre-COVID times. Well, the number one thing is I always ask people at tournaments, why don't you play on Magic the Gathering online? Like, what's wrong with you? You get to play unlimited amounts and you get to play against really good players. And they're like, it's not social.
Yeah.
And it's simple as that. I mean, if you're if you play the game for social interaction and you want to meet your buddies and you like to interact with people face to face and you got that back and forth talk as you talk to your opponents and see all your other friends that show up to F&M, you will absolutely not get that on Magic the Gathering online. The only thing people who interact with you online is they'll just be salty when you beat them. There's very that's why MTG Arena is all emotes, and even then people are salty with the emotes and are able to I don't know, troll people over the emotes, so that
be an annoying dick.
Even though there's yeah, exactly. So even though there's no chat, you could still get those people getting through there to their opponent. And so so socially, I mean, you're not going to get any pleasure out of Magic the Gathering online.
Yeah.
So what is Magic the Gathering online for? It is a great way to jam quickly a lot of games and against very good players. If you want to, you can play high quality events every day. You can play them on the weekend. They got modern open challenges called the challenges. You can play Modern, Legacy, Pauper, Pioneer. You can play Standard. They've got every format online. You can be playing at a pretty competitive level. These players are very good. They're going to be way higher caliber than your average player that's showing up to your local game store. I mean, unless your local game store is full of pros, I would not expect your local game store to be better than the players online. If you can learn to beat the players online or even go toe to toe with them, you don't even need to be winning, maybe even just 50%. You'll find that you're going to go back to your F&M and just slaughter them, because you're going to realize, oh, those players, they sharpen me really well. They really expose the leaks in my game. So it's very good. If you want to be a competitive player, you want to win, it's very good practice, and you can play as much as you want. Whereas, in paper, you go to F&M. Like, first off, you may only be able to play once a week pending, the schedule of your shop, or you only may be able to play, 1 or 2 times a week pending how many shops are in your city, or, how many are close to you. Whereas if you play online, you can play as much as you want, day and night. You can, we got leagues that you can start one day, finish off another day. So you don't even necessarily have to play the whole tournament all at once. You play at your schedule. Now, is there value to paper? Oh, you better believe there's value to paper. There's value to paper because online, and this is another benefit to online, it will do everything for you, and it will show you exactly what step of the turn that you're in. So you're learning the rules really well.
Yeah.
We attack exactly at the attacker step, and I'm not allowed to cast the spells or abilities until after I attack or my opponent has attacked. You can play spells at the damage step, for example. So you really learn the very fine nuances of the rules to Magic the Gathering. You see exactly visually how the stack works when you're allowed to respond. It's fantastic for that. But here's the problem. Magic the Gathering online, babies us a little bit too much. They will always trigger our spells and our triggers every single time. But in paper, they don't do that. So you got to learn how to do that yourself. And you know what? Paper Magic is still a route to the bigger events. And we don't know what's going to be in store for us as Wizards announce this, but you better believe that there's going to be some sort of Pro Tour-esque type events and Grand Prix like events going to be coming in the post-COVID era into the future. And you got to be prepared. I mean, you got to be able to recognize your triggers, because if you play purely online, I miss all my triggers in paper. I forget them, and it's very frustrating. So you do have to play in paper. You got to shuffle the cards. You got to shuffle your opponent's cards. You got to go through the mechanics. So there's still a lot of practice to be had on paper to help sharpen you for paper events. Because if you just play purely online, you probably might be at a disadvantage to other people who have at least prepared on paper.
Yeah.
Other advantages, let's see. You can rent decks online, whereas renting decks on paper is, well, not a lot of services let you do that. You can borrow cards online as well from friends, as you do like in paper, but it might be a lot easier in paper. Here's this card, here's this card, okay, and you make the deck and you can easily give it back to them. Whereas online, whatever, it's possible, but it's a little bit more annoying.
Yeah.
What other benefits are there to paper? I mean, it's more, I would say, Magic the Gathering Online more for the competitive players trying to get in those edges, sharpen those skills. Paper Magic, you just trying to have fun, just jam some games with your friends. I would say that would be the biggest differences. Wherever the value is for you, you just go there. That's all. It's all good.
Exactly. If you prefer playing against those higher skilled opponents, go on online. If you prefer holding the cards in your hands and handing them off to your buddies, play your LGS. There's
exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
It's still a game. It's still a game for a lot of people.
Exactly.
Make no mistake. We all started for fun. It's not like we're out there to win from the beginning. Oh, I'm going to play Magic the Gathering to just win. There's a lot of other games you can do to do that.
Yeah. Not going to join this game just to be the absolute best in the world.
Exactly.
So there's another one that I was asked earlier today. I just want to get your take on is, how easy is it once you've got accustomed to like one particular deck, like say Merfolk for you? How easy is it to swap a deck? Like say, I play a lot of Infect in Modern. If I were to go over to say Tron or something like that.
I would say it would be terrible. If the transition is not so easy. So there are some decks where I would say the fetch land decks make it the easiest to translate to another deck. So if you have, say, there's a control deck called Blue Moon, and you'd have Scalding Tarns, you'd have Steam Vents, you have Islands, Mountains, whatever. And that might translate to, say, maybe a Jeskai Stoneblade deck. That might translate okay. You're going to probably keep the Snapcaster Mages, the Lightning Bolts, Cryptic Command might still be in the deck. But for the most part, like, these mana bases don't translate very, very well at all. There are some tribal players. So like I can tell from my community, like if you play Merfolk, they love playing elves and spirits and humans, all the other tribes. So if you're a tribal player, you like to play vampires. So there are some tribal cards that are very expensive, say Cavernous Souls, Ether Vial, that if you buy some of those, it will help play the other ones. I've heard people, they bought into the Merfolk mana base because, if they want to play another deck, it's not that hard. They could play the budget version of all those creatures and just play with all the expensive mana base. Mutavault, Cavernous Souls, Ether Vial, and it's okay. They make it work. But I would say for the most part, it doesn't translate super, super well. You more or less commit to the deck, and some of that can be a decision when you buy into your first deck. How well can I convert this to something else? Because you look at Tron, like there's only one other deck that I think can share some of those cards. So and that's Eldrazi Tron, which is just Tron, but instead of big powerful planeswalkers, you're playing with a lot of Eldrazi. The only relatable cards like Expedition Map, the Urza's Tower, Mine, Power Plant, Karn the Great Creator, some Walking Ballistas. So maybe that's just something to consider when you buy into the deck. How much can it translate to another deck? Because most of them don't. So I mean that's up to you. I would say for the most part, it's difficult. I mean, whatever. I guess if you buy into like Ragavan and Dragon Rage Channeler and Mox Opal, not Mox Opal, Mishra's Bauble,
Mhm.
that might translate to a bunch of other decks that are playing those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see here.
A lot of Ragavan decks out there. Dragon Rage Channeler decks.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've been listening to a whole bunch of podcasts, and that's all, especially in the couple weeks after Modern Horizons 2 came out, that was all they were talking about,
Yeah,
which for good reason, I would say.
that's all they're still talking about.
Yeah. Let's see here. Still trying to think of what that Glimmer card was.
It's probably Glimmer Void. Headed off the tip. Yeah, it's Glimmer Void.
Oh
It's
yeah,
the
yeah.
card I was thinking about for the artifact decks, Glimmer Void. At end of turn, if you control no artifacts, sacrifice Glimmer Void. You can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So like, this is an example of a card that now every artifact deck plays this thing, but if you buy into Affinity, you got to understand that if you want to translate this mana base to something else, you're just translating it to like another artifact deck, whether it be like Hardened Scales Affinity or some sort of Were Prison deck or artifact prison deck.
Yeah.
They exist, but like that's as far as you go when it comes to a mana base like this. They have a very specific mana base that's just not translatable to
Yeah.
like, you can't throw it in burn. It's not like
No.
standard where you get your dual lands, and yeah, you can have it in archetype A, but if you want to
Mhm.
play archetype A anymore, you go play archetype B or C because they use the same mana base.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, that's why it's maybe I hear about it less now, but a lot of people used to collect all the fetch lands and all the shock lands so that they could play any deck at any time. But I don't know if
Yeah.
that even applies anymore because not every deck is playing with fetch lands and shock lands anymore.
Yeah. There's definitely a whole bunch that I've seen that are totally without them that do just finally absolutely demolish me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the best decks right now, as of the recording of this video, is Hammer Time, which I believe play no fetch lands.
Yep, that's the one that I'm looking at.
No, oh no, sorry, they have Marsh Flats.
Oh, did they?
I don't know if everyone plays Marsh Flats. Oh, they must do it to play around Blood Moon. But you know what?
Yeah.
They don't need Marsh Flats. They're just being fancy. They also might want a shuffle effect for one reason or another.
Yeah. So the final question that I had for you today is, what would you say budget-wise would be the best deck that translates to being as competitive as possible on a budget? What do you say generally as the best deck?
As competitive as possible on a budget. So like, what is the cheapest we can get into Modern while still winning big time? If the metagame is right, Burn. Now, I can't promise you Burn is always going to be well positioned, though, because there's a lot of hate cards for Burn. If Burn gets too prevalent, like people are like, okay, I'm tired of this. Let's get the Ley Line of Sanctities. Let's get the life gain. Let's send Burn packing. Let's send Burn back. They're going to send Burn back. So Burn comes in big waves. So like when you buy into Burn, you got to understand your deck is really good sometimes, or your deck is really terrible sometimes, but it always comes back. So you just sometimes got to shelve it, play something else in the meantime. Then when Burn becomes good again, you bring out the Burn deck. So because they've got a lot of cards in their deck that got reprinted a million times.
Yeah.
And also that deck can also be played. Well, you do want the fetch lands for Searing Blaze. But you could in theory play this off of no fetch lands whatsoever. There is also funny enough, Tron might also be like one of the cheaper decks. Sounds weird, but like for about like between $500 and $600, this is a deck that's been around for, I don't know, forever. Yeah, maybe like, and I see this is pretty common online, and maybe because it is like it's like basically a budget deck online, but for paper, somewhere between $500, $600, which used to be in like the medium range for a modern deck. This is now like pretty budget while still being really powerful. This is a tier 1 deck. It's been around since the beginning. It's one of the very few decks that have stood the test of time. and it's still around. And I would say that is also a very, very strong option to get into Modern. If you can consider
Awesome.
$600 budget, because the problem
Yeah.
is like the prices in Modern have exploded. There, it's like all the tier 1 decks are like $1,200, $1,400. It's
Yeah.
insane. These are like legacy prices as of like 10 years ago.
Yeah. It's looking at all the average deck costs now, they don't seem to be very cheap.
No, everything is money now. Everything is just straight up
like,
money. So all the good cards are expensive.
So the average Jun deck is going to run you about $1,700.
Yeah, like, and they're playing with all the. Well, I'm hoping they're playing with the new cards like Ragavan.
Yeah.
But that also pushes the price up. Also, another good option on like a budget, I guess between $600-$700 would be like Eldrazi Tron, but that's still in like the Tron era.
Yeah.
So if you don't like the control-ish thing, the control style of Tron, you go a little bit more mid-range style with the Eldrazi. You play your Thought Knot Seers. You play your Reality Smashers with Eldrazi Tron.
Absolutely.
And mind you, if you look at these decks and you're willing to sacrifice the mana base, you could play these things a lot cheaper. Like look at, count up how much money all the Scalding Tarns and stuff add up
Yeah.
to their mana base. Make some conscious decision. We're going to gut all this. It's okay. Just play with like fast lands or, what other mana base you can like conjure up. I would say you could play a pretty budget janky mana base if you play a 2-color deck. 3 colors, you got to maybe probably play with some triomes, which might be a little slow, but still playable. Do what you got to do. But like, I easily, if the cost of Modern is holding you back, just play with a budget mana base.
Yeah.
The cards still do the same thing.
Exactly.
You just be weaker than Blood Moon. I mean, you might be a little bit slower, but not so slow that I think it's pointless to build a deck. You can always upgrade it over time.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of one of the big things. You could start out with the budget mana base or budget versions of specific creatures or so, and then over time to start building it up, and then
build it up every month. Buy a creature to your deck.
Exactly.
Maybe once every 3 months you buy a fetch land.
Yeah.
Year goes by, you got the mat. You got your play set.
Yeah, and then you're golden. Well, thank you for coming on the channel today. It was awesome having you here to talk about Modern.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Of course. If people want to find you, where can they do so?
Oh, they can find me anywhere Nikachu MTG. I have several YouTube channels called one's Nikachu MTG, one's Nikachu MTG streams. All my like basically VOD stuff. Nikachu MTG covers all things Magic the Gathering. You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram. It's actually how you found me. You found me on Instagram. So it's good to have that thing there, even though I don't post there very much.
Yeah, exactly.
But all Nikachu MTG.
Well, awesome. I hope you guys did enjoy this, and be sure to check out Nikachu stuff here. The links will be down in the description.
Don't forget to smash the like button for this video.
Oh, exactly. Smash it or we'll come find you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find threatening people works. We'll find you. We'll find your trade binder.
Exactly. We'll come steal all your fetch lands.
Yeah.
Alrighty, but thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have a great day.